What's up, everyone? It's John Scanlon. This is All Access Live. And today we have a very, very special guest. We have Sam Evans from IAAP, or International Association of Accessibility Professionals. So, hi, Sam.
Hi, John. Thanks so much for inviting me to join you. I'm really excited to have a chance to chat more.
I know a couple of weeks ago, you and we hopped on a call, and it's so funny. We've gotten to know each other. I think we've exchanged emails in the past, but over COVID, just kind of being able to share posts and kind of communicate via LinkedIn, and to be able to talk was like such a lovely experience. And so I'm excited to kind of continue that.
It was a real treat for those of you who work in any kind of digital community or international space. We often get to know people remotely and appreciate their work and admire their efforts. And of course, I can recommend you should talk to John. And John and I made time a few weeks ago for the first time in years to just sit and hang out. It was awesome.
That's correct. Sometimes you have to be intentional about taking those kind of clarity breaks, or just kind of just talking, right? Just have those conversations and kind of have those real chats and get to know each other. I think not just from a professional level, but also personal, and that's one of the things that was really cool for me to learn more about you and how you got into the space, because I think pretty much everybody in the accessibility space knows about IAAP, and everyone knows your name from there. But to understand your tie to the community was something interesting to me, and it gave me a new level of empathy and understanding of why it's something you're passionate about. So I was wondering if you wouldn't mind just giving like a short kind of like background on how you got into the accessibility space and also the association space, because I think that's also interesting.
Sure.
There is a marriage of those two things.
Yeah, so I'm always really excited when my passions collide, and so since the 80s, yes, I'm dating myself a bit, but in the 80s, I grew up in a lot of advocacy in AIDS education and AIDS patient rights. And so I've been involved in advocacy for several decades.
Wow.
And part of that also was learning about different aspects of the human experience. When I came out of college, I came back after a short period of time, came back to Atlanta, moved in with a roommate who was losing her vision. And so she needed somebody with eyes that functioned, that could drive and help with paperwork. And so I learned a lot about vision loss and the challenges pre-internet, about finding access to tools and information, resources, and how to help my friend retain her independence as much as she could. So that was a really interesting endeavor. And I learned a lot about retinopathy and retina disorders. And a lot about navigating space and the experiences that my roommate and my friend had. For her low vision impact, she was very often kicked out of bars and restaurants. People thought she was drunk. And so we learned a lot about how to communicate with one another to allow her to take in information and not rely on what she was very opposed to at the time, was learning mobility and orientation and other tools. So we did a lot of creative think. So that was really interesting. But my first association job, associations or professional membership groups or trade organizations. My first job out of grad school was with an association, and my meeting planner uses a wheelchair. So my meeting planner taught me about meeting planning, about physical space, facilities, and meeting and event planning from the perspective of physical disability, navigation, usability. And I gained a really interesting perspective about meeting planning that was always very much steeped in access and equity for use, not just about the traditional meeting planning knowledge. So my association groups there also were professors, many of which had aged into disabilities or were living with other disabilities. And so we learned paper review, and I learned a little bit about digital accessibility there, but not enough to really have an appreciation. Through the years, many decades later, I came into an opportunity to work at an accessibility service center that provided e-text, so electronic text in various formats, so that people who used AT could read and engage with their content, braille and tactile graphics, captions and audio descriptions, and web and digital accessibility auditing services. And so I had a really unusual and amazing experience to work with professionals side by side, to learn firsthand as well as the place that also has the Assistive Tech Act. So lending libraries for assistive tech, high tech, low tech, mid tech, to let people live their life they want and their way they live, learn, work, or play in their community of choice. So, and then at that job, my boss said, "Hey, I have this project. It's the nonprofit organization I'm on the board of, and they have a certification program for accessibility professionals. It's small. I'd like for you to take that on as a project, and we have they'll cover that cost." And that was IAAP's first CPAC, Certified Professional
Oh,
and
wow.
Accessibility
Yep.
Core Competencies program. And it was meant to be like 10 or 12% of my time. And it was 35 people that had taken the first exam. And it's grown a little bit
Yeah.
where, it's 6 years later, 2.5 years ago, I came full time to work with IAAP because the certification program became large enough and scalable enough to need full-time support. So that's the short version of how my life and passions in association management came together.
No, that's super exciting. And so just, I love the fact that how you got into it was helping to give independence to people. Because I think, we often talk about how, at least how I talk about is that accessibility is not just about a line of code. It's about people's experiences. And so as you talk about your roommate who is going through her own vision loss and you helping to give her independence, I remember one of the things that you talked about was, writing out maps on her back, right, to giving her an idea of where things are. And, these are different things that it comes from those lived experiences, and you having that, having been side by side with people throughout your whole journey, I think it's amazing. And so, how has that impacted you think?
So for me, I want people to think about accessibility and disability inclusion about the opportunity, and it is an opportunity to optimize the human experience.
Yes.
So for my colleagues, when we work in associations and meeting planning, that side of things, those entire professions exist to bring people together and give them a place to belong.
Yes.
And so my experience with watching and trying to help navigate, how do we find ways for people to be independent? And it wasn't her vision that was the barrier. It was everything else in the world that was the barrier.
That's right.
She is hard-headed and strong and independent. And, but it was interesting to observe, not firsthand, but near firsthand, how that impacted people. And so I really, for many, many decades before it became a professional piece of work, wanted to say, we have to do better. And
Yeah.
if we can just understand empathy to build bridges and remove barriers versus sympathy, it's a fine line. But when you see what can happen, what we can do when we proactively make accessibility an intention, it's amazing. And it doesn't have to be about us, but it's really good to feel like you do good work for good reasons.
Yeah.
Just because, right?
No, for sure. I love that. You're right. People aren't looking for sympathy. There is that fine line of finding that empathy that to help remove those barriers, because that's all people are looking for. And I think, it took me 17 years after being diagnosed with retinitis pigmentosa to realize that I wasn't the one that's broken, right? For many years, I thought I was the one broken, but it's actually just our environment around it. It's that built environment around us and that's what I think you were doing with your certifications and helping to get people to think that way on how to remove those. So kind of, you talked about the CPAC, but where is it? Like, how many do y'all now have? Because I know
Almost 3,000 people around the world in 52 countries have the Certified Professional and Accessibility Core Competency. So
wow.
it's huge from 6 years ago. 35, 3,000 is pretty big growth, but it's because people are interested in learning, and that's amazing. So CPAC is called the core competencies because it does talk about some core knowledge, understanding disabilities, understanding what kind of assistive technologies and adaptive strategies people with disabilities use to deal with the world around them so that they can gain access and equity. And then also understanding theoretical models of disability so that when we hear, read, and learn about how people talk about disability, what influence it's coming from. Whereas when people say, oh, your body has this diagnosis, therefore you can't. That's a medical model. So it's that ties to the diagnosis as the problem and the person, versus a social model, which is a bit more about we as society we have an obligation to remove the barriers and make sure that people have the opportunity to engage equitably. So there's different models. And as you learn about them, you'll understand whether somebody's influence is legislative and medical or socioeconomic. So they help us understand what we hear and learn about.
And everyone can take that. I mean, that one I think is like a general that every leadership, I think everyone in leadership should take that.
I would love to see an accessibility champion in every team have that background.
Yes.
So CPAC is really a complement to everybody, no matter what your role, no matter what your level is. But everybody has the opportunity to understand disability. And then how do we implement it? What does that mean when we design, when we teach?
Yeah.
A little bit about web, not high tech, because it's not designed for that. And what are the laws and regulations and mandates around the world? And how do those represent disability or disability rights or not?
Yeah.
Just it's a good ground. It's very broad, but it's a really good foundation set of information and knowledge.
That's awesome. And so now, how many certifications now have you created? And now I know there's so many now. Like, what are some of the more recent ones that have y'all have developed?
So after CPAC, after the first core competencies, the second one was an intermediate technical, and that's the web accessibility specialist. Okay. That's an intermediate technical for people that deal with like the code, the underlying building elements of digital accessibility. Yeah. And it's designed for people that have about 3 to 5 years of experience in web accessibility because it's context knowledge. It's not memorization. And so it talks about the underpinning, the code elements themselves, and then QA testing and usability and accessibility testing as part of the process to develop a product so that we test before we deploy, but across operating systems and browsers and across a variety of types of assistive technologies and for different types of disabilities so that the people who are building and developing code understand why. We ask them to use the code and the impact it has on people. So that's the second one, WAS, that launched in 2017, and that's been really successful. People like to benchmark their knowledge, but also managers like to see year over year the report comes back that my team members who took the exam and passed have this newfound confidence. They take initiative. They're much stronger in their push because they have been reinforced that they have this knowledge and they're able to take initiatives much further. So WAS is the second. After that, we have a built environment program that originally came from colleagues in Canada. That's for people that work in physical spaces, buildings, public spaces. And that's built around universal design principles for built environments. So we know that it's not equitable when there's an elevator in the back, that you have to make a lot of headway to travel to get to it, then to, roll back, a quarter of a mile. It's not equitable. So things that we think compliance knowledge, like it applies, and yes, it's there, but it's not usable. So the built environment has a lot of those same tenets and principles.
Yep.
That has 3 levels. So, 3 to 5 years, 5 to 7, 10 years. So that's a great program for built environment professionals. And the most recent is accessible documents. And I know you and I have talked a lot about marketing, but accessible documents is really about ensuring that people understand how to author, create accessible documents in the original formats, how to remediate, and then how do you fix something that comes to you in a final format so that people can use navigation for their assistive technology to read and engage with content in documents. And that's a huge thing that a lot of us can master on our own without any really high-tech skills, but there's a little step beyond when you specialize in it. So we have 4 different certification initiatives. And when somebody gets both CPAC and WAS, the core competencies and web accessibility, would grant another credential called a certified professional web accessibility. So.
No, that's awesome. That's a lot of growth in 6 years. It shows how busy you are. And, but I think also, it's exciting because, when we talk about the CPAC, which I think, again, like we talked about, everybody, there should be at least one on every organization, right? And I think a champion there for everyone. And on the documentation, you and I went into that quite a bit, right? It's had the importance of people, understanding that level, right, and adding that value, because it's how do you communicate with people, right? Making sure that we're transmitting, accessible documentation, social media posts, everything, right? So, it's great that you have it for the technical folks and you have it for the non-tech folks, right?
Absolutely, and the ability, I think, for those of us who work in inclusion to be able to speak to teams no matter where and help them understand how building accessibility in really, if they start closer to the beginning. It's easier to make the changes in process and policy and build it as part of your practice than to have to fix it bolt on afterwards, because it's a lot more work and time to go back and fix something. So
Yeah.
helping people understand how to build accessibility into their workflow takes some concept and knowledge to help people, to influence them to change and adopt.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, this is kind of perfect timing because, next week is Global Accessibility Awareness Day. And that's really why I wanted to have you on before that, because, what do you think it is? Again, we have a variety of different folks who listen in. We have people who are in the beginning of their journey, and then we have people who are well into their journey. But what do you think it is like for, let's say, somebody starting off their journey? What do you think is a way for people to start? Where can they start? What is something good for people to start doing in their organizations, from an awareness standpoint, and help raise that within their organizations?
So I think it's really important. So next week is, as John mentioned,
Mhm.
Global Accessibility Awareness Day, GAD. And so you'll see on social media, you're likely to see, if you work in any spaces that touch disability awareness, lots of activities and posts. But I think it's really important if people want a way to start. What do I do at my desk? Me, just one person. I don't have a team. There's not a
Yep.
resource group. Um, think about learning about disabilities and how people with disabilities engage with the world. There's a great book. I don't know, John, if you've read it. Emily Ladau has a book called Demystifying Disability,
Oh,
how to
nice.
talk about and learn about disability. Is a great, easy read. But I think things that we can do at home ourselves is start to learn about assistive technologies. Use your keyboard to try to navigate a website, download the free screen readers that are built in, check out whether or not the videos you're watching have captions. And
Yep.
if they do have captions, do the letters and words that are displayed on the
Match
screen
up.
match what's said if you have hearing to use? And if not, how different is that content? What kind of an impact would that make on taking in the information if you rely on captions? And as you're checking out events and activities, think about, do are there things that are flashing? Thank goodness we're past the GeoCities time frame of tech stuff on web, but flashing elements are distracting, but they're dangerous for other people, and things that move quickly. If we understand how that impacts people first as our
Yes.
perspective, as opposed to what's wrong with the world of the web, I think it's a better opportunity for us to understand how to start affecting change. And then what are the things you can do? I can write alt text for my pictures in my social media posts, my graphics, my documents. I can use contextual links. So instead of saying click here, read here, I can
Yes.
say read more about our certification on this,
Yes.
read more about the certification programs. You can make sure your videos are captioned. There's lots of really great low cost resources if you have time, or low cost for some automation that you can also affect. And make sure that if you have the opportunity, if you're planning an event or activity, make sure that you talk about what accessibility components are built in. What have you included in your program and services? Because that's going to let people know you thought about me, you recognize I exist.
Yeah.
Wow, I'm welcome. And I don't have to ask for you to consider how I might be able to engage, and list what accommodations you can provide, if it's not built into your delivery. So those are
Yeah.
things that people can do. You can start now with low budget, no budget.
Yeah.
Things that everyone can do, and you don't have to have an advanced degree, and you don't have to write code, but there are all ways that you can start experimenting and getting first person experience with considering accessibility.
No, I love it. You gave some really good tactical things that people can do at their desk right away, right? So the book Demystifying Disabilities, great start. And then, yeah, just turn on a voiceover, or turn off a screen reader or something to try it out and see what that experience and also look in the captions. So I love that. So what about the people? You and I have talked about this. How do you think for folks who are interested in getting into the field of accessibility, you and I have been talking about potentially how do we create internship opportunities. But what are ways do you think for an individual who wants to get into the field and to get their first foot into the door? What do you think is a good way?
It's interesting. So I think entry level jobs across the board probably don't have the right expectations for what people say. I want to enter into this
Yeah.
field. So be aware that that applies across everything, not just in accessibility. But a lot of organizations that do have accessibility teams are going to start with accessibility testing as an opportunity. And it doesn't mean advanced level things, but it's kind of what might be called usability testing for accessibility as one concept,
Yep.
or people that are accessibility agencies that have jobs where they teach or provide consulting. Find ways that you can illustrate your experience with accessibility. I watched a video this morning from a candidate. She's self-taught, but she created a video to express how a non-technically trained person could start to learn about digital accessibility. So there are ways you can create portfolios for yourself to illustrate your knowledge and awareness of accessibility. If you're working in documents, you could put together a portfolio of documents that you've remediated yourself.
Yeah.
You can show videos that you've put on YouTube yourself, that you've captions that are accurately captioned. You can talk about websites, things that you've learned. So I think people can illustrate it. It's a little bit of a marketing approach.
Yeah.
How do I market myself? How do I illustrate this? And understand the words and terms that people may use for jobs. And I think one of the interesting things to do is when companies post positions where they already have people in some roles, look at the people that are in those roles and what their job duties and descriptions are so that you can determine what's the difference between a senior or more established level, a junior, or an entry level. So you may find customer support roles and account management roles as ways to come into accessibility agencies to learn and gain more experience. But you can certainly bring your self-taught illustrations and portfolio and say, hey, I'm ideal. I can transfer my skills. I have this passion. I can show you what I've done. I think those are ways that people could approach entry-level jobs or transfer from one industry or profession to another. It's really an interesting process to kind of watch what's out there.
Yeah.
I would love to see more internships, and John, you and I have talked about that.
Yep.
They don't really exist yet in the UK. There is an apprenticeship program that the government features and sponsors. For the first time, the digital accessibility apprenticeship came into play last year, which is great. So, but I think if you have a passion for understanding beyond compliance, and if you're not working in code and you don't have experience with development and code, there are other ways that you can express your interest and what you've learned, and how that could be a benefit to a company that has an accessibility role.
I love it. I mean, you gave some good tactical things that, again, anyone can do. Building that portfolio, right? Showing what you've learned and presenting that in a, marketing yourself for the role. It's awesome. And my stomach, I actually had a tummy ache, and I was like, I just want to keep talking. And it's like, because there's so much stuff to to dig into. But I know we have to wrap it up soon. But as we're looking next week, how are you spending Global Accessibility Awareness Day? What are you doing?
So I have so many things where my colleagues and friends are hosting great events and activities, but I'm going to do two things that are really I'm excited about. One is I am going to present to a meeting planning professional group, and that's their GAD event. Is I'm going to talk to them about how to build accessibility and disability inclusion into the event planner structure.
Awesome.
Things that they already do, when and where to plug it in their process, and how to do it, and build their resource toolkit, which is exciting for me. I like to talk to people who don't do accessibility as a professional role about building accessibility in. So
you need to get out of the echo chamber sometimes, right? And that's fun. Yeah, that's super cool.
And the other is that I'm talking to a company that is actually an applicant tracking job application system, a talent recruitment tool, talking to their development team about the importance of the work they're doing. They have an old legacy system, but they have remediated it. And as they build anything new, they're building accessibility in. It's amazing to look at visual focus features and navigability on a job application site. It's one of the weakest points in the employment sector is that application process. So I have a really great opportunity to talk with them. I'm so excited. So two places that are not the traditional accessibility conversation points.
But I guess that's what raising awareness is about, right?
It is. And so really I get to reinforce the good work that their lead engineer is doing. And I think I recorded a session earlier this week too with one of the accessibility agencies talking about their work. So
that's awesome. But you're right. You mean, I think from meetings and events, it's so critical, right? Yeah. As somebody who is blind and going to events, and as we open back up, moving from the digital events to more in the in-person, how critical is it going to be as we think about that? And then also from a job applicant's, so critical, right? It's like so critical. But I'm super excited about this. And Sam, thank you so much for just taking the time to just, you know, to be open, to be a leader, and just be my friend. So thank you so much. And how can people, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you?
So I have my I call it the electronic leash. My tie to social media is very often on. You can find me on LinkedIn, posting mostly about association management and accessibility. And I think my name on LinkedIn is Samantha Spears Evans. I did have a maiden name for part of my professional life, so people still call me by that. On Twitter, it's Sam Spears Evans on Twitter. So look me up. Ask
Awesome.
questions. I'm open to helping you find resources, or if you just want to read along, I appreciate it. But John, what a treat. In our workday world, it's so nice that we actually had time and made time to just sit and talk. And it was so refreshing, and I appreciate it. And thanks for making time for these like LinkedIn Live, Access Live programs. This is great.
Yeah, no, it's so much fun. And I get to meet so many people and share the stories of so many people, because I think that's how we raise awareness, is by sharing stories. And it's interesting. I talk about how many of our stories are, they're all the same. It's just our journeys are unique, and we all go through different challenges, and so to be able to share that, and hopefully other people can relate to them.
And if people are interested in learning about how they can benchmark or learn more about their skills and knowledge in accessibility, the International Association of Accessibility Professionals is accessibilityassociation.org online. We have webinars, education, networking, and I, of course, manage the certification program. So if you're interested, have a question, pop over to the website. You can submit a contact us question request. And if you'd like to engage with us, we'd be happy to talk with you and help you join, advance, or progress through your way in accessibility and support your work there.
Awesome. So hopefully we see a lot more than 3,000 next year, even. Right?
I would love it.
Well, thanks, Sam. Appreciate your time, and have a great GAD next week.
All right, you too. I'll look forward to seeing your stuff. I've seen your name pop up in several things, so we'll be busy.
Yes. Well, thank you again.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.